Okay, we are live. Hello and welcome to our first peer-to-peer session of the 2016-17 program year. I'm Melissa Tanner. I'm the Family Programs Educator at the Art Institute of Chicago, and I'm excited to introduce this new hangout for the day. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation on gallery teaching. We're especially grateful because I'm sure many of you, like us, were up late watching the election results roll in, and it really is just wonderful to gather together and to be part of such a thoughtful community. So we're grateful to have you here with us today. So before we get started, I just wanted to do a really brief introduction about peer-to-peer, which began in 2011 through an initiative of the National Art Education Association's Museum Education Division. It's an opportunity where we can have more resources and connections and conversation outside of the annual convention with a variety of topics then, and getting to hear from our colleagues and our peers. So there's an unlimited number of people can participate in our Hangouts, and in addition to being offered live, these conversations are recorded and you can access them later for future viewing on the Google Plus page of the Museum Education Division. So the peer-to-peer initiative has grown to now have monthly Hangouts. These Hangouts are hosted on the second Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m. Eastern, but I know our panelists today are coming from different time zones, so that translates to 10 a.m. Pacific or 12 p.m. Central if you're in my time zone. So it's hopefully a nice time to be able to connect either at the beginning of your day or over a lunchtime break. And so our next session is going to be on Wednesday, December 14th. Again, at that same 1 p.m. Eastern time, and we're going to be focusing on diversity and social justice. And just my last plug is that if you've joined us for a peer-to-peer before, you might notice things are looking a little bit different today. Google Hangouts is beginning a transition over to YouTube Live. And so with that, there are some changes, some challenges. We unfortunately don't have access to the interactive Q&A feature that we loved so much that allowed you to interact with our panelists. But we still really want to hear from you if you have questions or comments about this great conversation we're about to have. So please turn to our Twitter account. The handle is at NAEA MuseEd. That's NAEA MUSED. And please share your thoughts with the panelists. We'll be keeping an eye on that feed throughout the broadcast, and we'll be able to address any questions or share resources that you have with us throughout the conversation. So that's all of our housekeeping. And so I'd love to turn things over to begin thinking about our topic for the day, which is gallery teaching. It's at the heart of what we do as museum educators. And Young Kim from the Philadelphia Museum of Art and Amanda Driver from Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art have planned a really rich conversation exploring engagement strategies for teaching from works of art. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to them to take us away.
All right. Okay, I'm unmuting myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Driver. I'm head of school access and partnership programs at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art in Bentonville, Arkansas, and I'm one of the co-facilitators for this session today, and really glad to be with everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conversation. So we are going to hear from each of the panelists, giving a brief introduction, their name, their institution, their role, and the audiences that they work with. Let's start with Young.
So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Young Kim. I manage school program at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. My audience is school children, K-12, and teachers. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for joining us.
All right, and let's go down the line to Danielle.
Great. Hi. I'm Danielle Schultz. I'm the coordinator of adult and access programs here at the Denver Art Museum. My audience is pretty broad, so I go everywhere from kind of younger kids who might have some special needs up to older adults. So it kind of runs the gamut, but today I'm going to mostly be focusing on audience with special needs.
Great, thanks, Danielle. All right, next, Olivia.
I'm Olivia Birkland, and I'm an independent educator at the Frick Collection in New York. And I've been doing it for about 6 years. The students are usually grade 5 up through to college, but I usually focus on middle school.
All right, great, thank you. And Sally?
Hi, am I showing up? Okay,
Yes.
I'm Sally Ball. I am the Assistant Manager of School Programs and Gallery Teaching at Crystal Bridges Museum of American Art, and my audience is primarily K-12 and teacher.
All right, wonderful. It's great to have panelists from all over the country with us today. And just kind of wanted to jump in, starting kind of with the basics and kind of going back to basics as to what does good gallery teaching look like to each of our panelists and to their teams within their departments or to their institution. And also, what is your teaching philosophy, either a personal teaching philosophy or a department-wide teaching philosophy. So starting with Young.
So hello. So for me, working with students, I think open-mindedness is the most important sort of attitude that I would like to have and our staff to have when it comes to, because you can't really, you don't know. And usually, you're working with a group of students. Every student is different. So being open-minded is really important. And also the engagement is really important, how we engage them. So through activities or looking deeply, looking activities. So through different activities, and how can we foster their learning and creativity. So we believe that teaching is individual thing, but also when you are working in an institution with a team of educators, through brainstorming and working together, collaboration is really important part of being a museum educator. So all these different aspects has to sort of come together as like a puzzle. Yep.
Okay, great, thanks, Young. I think we'll just keep going down the line. At least this is the order at the bottom of my screen. I don't know if it's different for other people, but that would mean that Danielle is next.
Okay, that's great, because I actually wanted to jump in after that. I think that Young had some really good points of kind of really, not assuming, really thinking about who your audience is. And I think especially with special audiences, we really have to focus on creating a comfortable and inviting space. At least in my kind of perspective, in my experience, there's a lot of people who have disabilities who haven't always felt comfortable going to art museums, whether it's because of physical access or the attitudes. So I think my job and my teaching philosophy is really looking at creating a comfortable, inviting space, welcoming people. I think it's important to have that kind of personal invitation to come to the museum. And I really focus a lot on conversation-based tours, inquiry-based. I mean, a lot of things, again, we all do in our practice, but I think what I really think about as essential is really having them walk away with a connection, hopefully to the work of art, hopefully to myself leading the discussion, and then hopefully to the other people that are involved in there as well. I think that connection is really important. So I would say kind of my main pillars are kind of comfort, conversation, and connection. And I think if those, are kind of, the main things that I'm really focused on.
Great, thanks. All right, Olivia, do you want to add?
I would agree with what everybody else is saying. I would say at the Frick, it's funny, the philosophy is a little different because they question questions. So the idea is that, yes, you want to have a probing dialogue between the collection and the students, as well as this idea that people come to it without direction, which is very tricky. And the head of education, Rika Burnham, is very forgiving, and is allowing all of us educators to explore that on our own. So sometimes we do use questions. I use questions quite a bit, open-ended ones, but I try to keep it, my goal is sort of to make sure that everybody in the group is facilitating the conversation more than I am. So it's trying to get the students to interact with each other, with the art object as the source. And welcoming and having fun is definitely key to all of that. So, you know, that goes in there too.
All right, great. Thank you. And Sally?
Like Olivia, we use conversation-based gallery programming. And so everything everyone has said is very applicable to what we do. I guess what I would add is respect is a really important word within my team. So we have 3 areas: respect for the artwork, respect for individuals, and respect for ideas. So we want to honor those differences of opinion that come and work with students on civil discourse, things of that nature. So something that seems really small, but is very important to my team is name tags. We like to call all the students by name so that they feel personally part of the group and welcome to make those, you know, share their ideas and make those connections.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think, so I work with a range of audiences, similar to, as Danielle mentioned, K-12 teachers, school partnerships, and individuals with disabilities, as well as English language learners and non-native English speakers. And so kind of echoing what a lot of people have already said, I feel like one of our biggest goals and what good gallery teaching kind of looks like, for me personally, is making those connections. So whether those connections are with the work of art, whether they're personally within their group and kind of understanding and making connections like within their community or the community that we're creating at the museum, or whether it's for me as a facilitator kind of making connections with the group, that's always something that's really important to me. And so our next question is kind of touching on, I think, young about some, you know, strategies or techniques, touched on it just a little bit, but just to go a little deeper into this idea of what strategies or techniques have you used in your teaching that you found to be really successful? And then also, how did you know they were successful? How did you assess those strategies? So I think for this time, yeah, we can just open it up to, is there anyone who would like to start? Olivia, you're at my screen, so if you want to jump ahead and start,
Sorry.
and then, no, that's great. That works fine. Yeah, and then anyone who wants to fill in can just kind of chime in.
Yeah, teaching strategy, I would say, you know, strangely enough, I find that research and preparation never can be enough. I know that there are specific strategies, you know, certain kinds of questions and certain ways of listening, and I will go to that, but I also, just as a sidebar, over the years, I've found that the more excited I am about my own research, the more I can help the students get excited as well, especially if it's fresh. So that idea of renewing it all the time. And because it's not, our groups aren't theme-based, the conversations can go in many different directions. And so the more preparation I have, the more ability I have to go in whatever direction they might go in order to bring it back to the art, bring it back to the object. So I find that exciting when they find that exciting. So that's one strategy, which is an assumption, but it's always a good thing to remind myself of that. You know, the quest, you know, right? Always looking for the same, breaking the piece apart together as a group effort. And sometimes the question might be a question that I actually have myself about the object, which helps level the ground. Do you know what I mean? So that we're all looking for the same thing together. So, you know, the idea of prompts like, let's piece this together, you know, with older kids it would be, or, let's be generative now after taking a moment to look. Sometimes if there's it's very hard to be comfortable with silence, but to really embrace it. And sometimes with younger kids, that's difficult. So to prepare them for that, maybe in the way into the galleries, you'll say, well, it might be a little awkward, but we're just going to really take time to look now. And so if I say, sometimes I wonder this about this object, that sort of helps them get to the next place. What's the other? And then, of course, scaffolding. And then other little techniques like moving. Like I even consider it an activity. The front line goes to the back goes to the front. They go side to side, and they see it differently. If a student brings up something that's way off topic, I try to bring it back around to the artwork, and by doing that, sometimes I throw it back to the group. I try to throw it back to the group as much as I can. So that they, does someone disagree or not? Sometimes I don't do that. Sometimes I say, is there another word for that? And also modalities, to switch it up. So sometimes I might even start a little bit with a lecture and then have observation, or then, in the middle, do storytelling, and then go back to observation. So the rhythm is changed from object to object.
Can I also kind of piggyback on that? I think those are really, really wonderful points, Olivia. And what I heard a lot is this idea of flexibility, and that you need to be flexible with what questions are going to come, what discoveries are made. And I think in particular, when I'm working with adults with Alzheimer's, you have to be open and ready for that, because there are going to be things that are brought up that might not have a direct relation or might not be on this path that you might have seen this talk going, but they're wonderful discoveries. And I think the validation of that flexibility is so important. And I think that's something that it's wonderful, because I think hopefully with this whole conversation we're having today, we'll realize that all of these strategies that we're using with these very different audiences are really can go across. There can be used with a kindergartner up to someone who is 98 years old. There's a wide variety. And I think that idea of flexibility, that idea of really having that discovery piece, I think is really important. And again, I know I'm talking about, again, audiences that might not always feel comfortable in the museum, but I think having that discovery coming from them is what's so essential, where it's not that I'm giving you this information, it's that you're finding this yourself, you're being able to converse and share. And I think that's just a really wonderful thing. And I think going on as well, that idea of adding humor into it, I think that is one of my biggest tools that I try and bring in, especially if you're talking about an artwork that maybe is not the most popular artwork. I think that's another important thing, is to not shy away from pieces that might not be seen as popular. We just had a exhibit of abstract expressionism, women from that time period, and it was a fabulous showing. But I know that abstract expressionism is not everyone's bag, and yet we're not shying away from it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to do it, and not everyone has to love it. So I think that it's having that humor as a part of it is really important to making people feel comfortable. And I think going to the idea too of how do we know it's successful? It's really reading our audience, seeing at that time, how are they feeling? Are they laughing? Are they reacting? Are they talking to their partner next to them? Are they asking questions? Are they making these observations that, again, might not be connected with our conversation, but how do we bring that in and make sure that it's still validated in every way? And I think that's wonderful. And of course, yeah, as you said, the layering information, I think, is a wonderful way to do that, to still make sure that they're getting information that they want and need, but making sure that it's in a way that is organic to the conversation that we're having. So I just wanted to jump in on that.
I'd like to add a couple of ideas. So for me, I think sometimes, of course, flexibility is really important, but also being able to give children choices of activity. I might bring, writing activity, but also maybe ask them like, okay, well, choose a painting here. We just looked at this painting together. Choose a painting that you like in this room, in this gallery. And you might choose a drawing activity or a writing activity. Sometimes words don't come easily for certain children, or drawing is not an easy tool for them. So giving them a choice, and they feel it okay to choose one activity, or some kids, overachievers, will choose both, and that's okay. I think sometimes being able to give them choices is a really great way to have all children be engaged. And sometimes, when it's successful, a lesson, when you have to say, okay, that's it, that's enough, we gotta stop, we gotta go, and they don't want to go, they want to stay and do more. Or when you go to a next gallery and you see them using the skill that we just practiced in the previous gallery, and I think that's, and they want to come back and ask you, when can I come back next time and do more and see more. I think that's when I know that it's a successful lesson, that they want to come back.
And I just, one thing I would add is, like Olivia said, movement can be so helpful, from either giving a different point of view or a different perspective when looking, but also we've had situations where maybe a couple of students are debating something that they see in a work of art, and to actually have them stand up and act out what they're seeing sometimes brings clarity to everybody in the group. And so that's been fun to watch. And I would agree with Young completely. You just kind of feel when it works right. As far as assessment, it's different with every group, what's going to be successful and what success looks like, but you can feel it when it happens.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say for some of the programs that I work with, that we use different strategies depending on our goal and depending on the audience that we're working with. So, for example, last week I was doing a program with some from a local university and med school, and so our goal was really kind of on this on observation and really describing and close looking. So doing some of the artful thinking routines, like looking 10 times 2, really kind of getting them to look at the work, discuss with a partner, and then look back at the work and find some new things. And that seemed to go over really well. It was very successful. As far as their feedback was, this really complements what we need to do in our professional environment. And then just some other, to Danielle's point, I think about, some of these same strategies work well regardless of age. So using some of these same techniques with younger children all the way up to older adults, I think it kind of runs the gamut as far as who you can engage with, but ability, these ideas of connection, and really listening to people and listening to their ideas, and really trying to find those points of connection among different ideas. Sometimes ideas that might seem really different, but if you can find a way to connect them, I think that can be really successful as well. Okay, so our next question is, I'm going to open this up again to anyone. If you've tried anything that you feel like just flopped, if you are comfortable sharing that with our group, maybe what you tried and how it flopped or why it flopped, and if there's any way you tweaked it maybe and had a successful experience later on.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here. Selfies with high schoolers, that flopped. And the biggest reason was that we found that high schoolers were not comfortable. I mean, taking the selfie was fine, but having any kind of a hashtag where they would share it, that did not fly at all. So we tried different ways to tweak it. Ultimately, we gave it up as a fail.
All right, thanks. Anyone else want to share?
I can share one. I think trying to do too much sometimes get us in trouble. With younger students, we might do some movement activity, we do too many activities. And most of the galleries are really safe, but certain galleries, especially with modern and contemporary pieces with low hanging paintings, large paintings on glaze, we did have some incidents that caused by school groups just moving around in those galleries. So, we were so excited about our new activities. We wanted to try out our new activities, but sometimes we don't really think about how, we're putting works of art in danger. So we always need to sort of practice and think about the spaces and how we're going to do it. And sometimes, just bringing too much stuff to do. I think we often, we're just focused on the activity, not, looking at art. So sometimes you look at the kids doing these activities, but they're not really looking at, art. So I think, we need to sort of re-examine, how we use these activities successfully so that it is the works of art is, sort of focus of the activity.
I would agree with Anyan, because that was kind of my thing as well, of looking at, are we trying to fit in too much to a certain experience, whether that is too many activities, also maybe too many artworks, because I think sometimes when we have special exhibits, it's really hard. You want to show them, this is a wonderful exhibit and here's 60 paintings, let's try and get to 10. Like, that's insane, that's way too much. But I would agree, also looking at, I think what's great is that our field is really looking at these multimodalities and making sure that we're having, drawing activities, writing activities, movement, music, sound. But if you're trying to then do all of that with one work of art, are you losing the intention of, really looking or interacting with the work of art? And I know I am definitely at fault for that, where I'm like, ooh, there's music that could go with this, and then we can act out the sculpture and we can draw about it, but then I know sometimes it's like, okay, let's go back to really what the goal is and maybe find that one connection. So again, I think it's wonderful to hear. I'm like, oh, other people are having that issue too. That's nice.
Just to add on to that, I totally agree. I've had that experience too. Sometimes it comes from my overexcitement as well, like, when it, also it depends on the group. When
You're frozen, Olivia. Yeah, well, so I think, Olivia, when you come back, it looks like you're frozen, but I guess it's with the group. Also, I guess trying to maybe match what your activity is to the group. I don't know, I think that kind of goes along too with what Sally was saying of the selfies. But yeah, I think that's great. Olivia, looks like you're back now. Okay.
Olivia, did you want to add or kind of chime in where you left off? You were frozen for a little bit, so we didn't get to hear everything that you were saying. Oh no, I think she's still frozen. I thought she was back, but maybe not. So just to add on to what other people said, as far as some things that have flopped, I think sometimes, so it also, again, depends on your audience and how well your audience knows each other. So if you have a school group coming and they're in their classroom setting where they might feel really comfortable with each other, that's one thing, and you can kind of hit the ground running sometimes on tours. But there's times when you have maybe a group that doesn't know each other that well. And so really kind of start like setting the kind of creating this community feeling, I think, is really important. And I've had instances where I guess I didn't realize maybe if a group was coming that they didn't know each other very well, or I just didn't feel like maybe I had enough time, or I didn't do a very good job of kind of building that community part at the beginning, letting everyone introduce themselves and really get to know each other. It wasn't until the very end of the experience or the tour that they really felt comfortable and were able to kind of open up and share thoughts and ideas more readily. So I think that's something definitely that I try to work into all of my programs and experiences, really reading the group and kind of getting some information on the front end as to whether or not they know each other well or not, and really having that opportunity for everyone to create that community and have it feel like a open space where they can really share thoughts and ideas. Olivia, are you back?
Yes, I'm back, but who knows? But yeah, totally. Also the front end, like whether they know each other, I've run into that too. It's important to assess. Also, different ages are more, I mean, you know, they're more open to sharing. So, you know, when you get towards high school, I found that sometimes the students are a little more self-conscious. And so trying to find different strategies for them is different than for the younger kids, you know? So sometimes the silence will last longer. And if you can, at the front end, find things that you have in common with them, as far as the work or why they're there, you know, that always helps. The front end is really important, I find.
Yeah, so maybe to go along with this idea of flops, and Olivia kind of just touched on it, saying, you know, depending on the age, we might need to make some modifications or adaptations to what we would do with other ages or other students. So if anyone wanted to touch on that just a little bit about what do you do when you have a group that's not really responding that well with each other or with the work of art, and are there techniques that you have found that were successful to engage them?
Well, I've had some groups that, to kind of warm them up when they're not feeling comfortable, I have found that in small group work, a lot of times just with a prompt, like kind of Olivia was talking about, giving them a lens through which to look at the art, they'll discuss it in a small group and feel comfortable with each other in a way that they don't feel comfortable with me yet. And usually after that, that tends to open up the group moving forward in the tour to being more comfortable with each other.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, that I think trying to have work together that they can then share out to the larger group is really nice. I also find if you add in different, again, like hands-on materials, I think that can sometimes work well, where people can interact with some aspect, whether it's a piece of fabric that is found in the painting or the same material that the sculpture is made of. I think that can also sometimes be a jumping off point about talking maybe about that object, but that can get them to also then look differently or be able to share something that's connected to something more physical. Because going back to our initial conversation too, of talking about sometimes questions, if they're really open-ended, can be intimidating if they're not comfortable, as we've said, with our grouping. So I think breaking down the questions too. So sometimes if there is a big open-ended question that I've asked and I'm not getting a lot of responses, I'll switch to maybe a yes and no answer, or questions that are more thoughtful. What are your feelings, or what are, things that maybe just changing up the questioning technique can sometimes, I think, help with that as well.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. Okay, great. So then kind of moving forward, I know some of the individuals on the panel have used technology in experiences in front of artworks more than others, but if anyone wants to share what kinds of technologies you've used in the galleries and what worked and what didn't, and especially I'm curious to hear about this idea of maybe technology enhancing the experience instead of being a distraction, because I think there's kind of a fine line as to what's distracting away from the work of art and the object, as Ayang was talking about, and what's enhancing the experience to have that more meaningful connection.
So we definitely use iPads to share images while we're teaching. We used to, before iPads, we use, of course, laminated images, and we, each museum gallery educator will laminate them and whatever images you want to use. But now that we have iPads, more than 10 gallery teachers we have here, we could share those images, through iCloud. However, there were 4 or 5, museum educators who were a little afraid of using iPads at the beginning. I don't want to use them. It's too heavy. It's too much. I don't know how to use them. But it took a little bit of time, but now they're in love with using them. So it's now the question is, are we using too much? But we use them to sort of enhance our looking. So we might be showing images of other examples of the works of art by same artist, or we might be showing just supplementary images to sort of help kids understand what we're looking at. But sometimes I think, again, that knowing, how many images is enough, and are we using too much? Are we just looking at the iPads, not looking at the works of art? I think that's a big question. But also sharing images was a little bit tough, among more than 10 museum educators, because one person will download some images, and those images are not shared with everybody. So there's always like, I want to get those images. How can we share them? So it needs, it requires a little bit of coordination. So somebody taking charge of sort of leadership among those museum educators to sort of take care of those hardwares.
For us, we used technology when we had a photography exhibition. So what we did, we wanted to use iPods so that we could demonstrate the principles of photography that were important to different photographers through having the students practice those by taking their own pictures in the gallery. What we found to be the most difficult part of that was locking down the iPods to a point where nothing but the camera was accessible. So that was the tough part. And then from there, once a week on Tuesdays, all the images would go into a Flickr file, and then teachers would be able to access them from Flickr. But the students loved it. I mean, I feel like that enhanced the photography exhibition.
Great. All right. And I haven't used that much technology on tours. I've used some, I guess we can consider it low tech, very low tech, almost no tech experiences. So like Danielle was saying, using tactile materials in front of a work of art, either a material that kind of mirrors what's in the work of art, so swatches of fabric, or maybe a chain to show, we have a portrait, a colonial portrait where there is a flying squirrel on a golden chain. So really kind of showing the texture of that chain. And we use these tactile materials on tours with youth, and we also use them. I recently was working with our local chapter of the Arkansas Council of the Blind, and so really using these tactile materials in the galleries along with verbal description to, at first with verbal description, really kind of giving this description of what the painting looks like, so that individuals who were unable to see it could kind of paint an image of it in their mind, and then really using the materials, kind of weaving those in, the tactile materials, while describing. So, she's wearing this dress, it looks like it could be made of satin, here's an example of satin, and really kind of going into the color as well, and the texture that the artist was conveying through that work. So I know not everyone's used maybe technology as far as iPads, iPods, and those kinds of things, but any other kind of more low tech experiences that you would like to touch on?
We definitely have more low-tech things, as you were saying, more kind of tactile pieces that we use both for a regular program that we offer for individuals with vision loss, but also for our other tours, because again, we've noticed that having these tactile components, whether it's a 3D, reimagining, reproduction of an artwork in front of them, is actually helpful for our programs for individuals with Alzheimer's, also for younger kids who want to be able to actually touch and feel the different textures and grooves. And even more so we have a program for kids with autism. So I find that helps too. And I think it's interesting because it seems low tech, and yet the production that went into making them is high tech. So I guess that is a high tech thing. But I think also the idea of adding more verbal description, again, that's a low tech way, but I think it is a very interesting way of really enhancing the viewing opportunity and really having these crafted, rich verbal description pieces to go along with typical tours, I think is really nice. And I think there are components that does take a lot of time to get into them, but really thinking about what are all the different details that our eyes just take in so quickly that we don't even notice we're seeing them. I think including that is a way to kind of slow things down. So I think that's a really interesting thing that we're trying to do much more too.
Am I frozen still? No. So we, at the Frick, they use iPads. We use iPads. A lot of times it's to reveal a question, an answer to a question that the group might have. So there's one portrait, for example, that is derived from another older painting, the clothing and the setting. So we might discuss, the setting and the clothing and the props, and it might not completely jive maybe with the face or, the feeling that we're getting. And then eventually, I might present it and say, well, isn't it interesting because this is derived from this painting? And so then I use the iPad in that way. I don't use it very often because, as everyone is saying, it kind of takes away from the object sometimes, looking, close looking. But it can be also exciting. One problem I have is making sure that everyone really sees the iPad images well enough, because then it becomes sort of like this closed-in thing, and is everyone really seeing, and do we have time? And so that's a tricky thing that I'm dealing with the iPad.
Great, thank you. So we have a little bit of time maybe for one last question before we kind of open it up and see if there's been any questions posted on Twitter. And if not, we'll fill the space with some other discussion points and questions. But kind of this goes back to, someone was talking about this, maybe it was Young, about or maybe it was Danielle, about fitting in too many things. I think it was Danielle, about having a finite amount of time to spend with the group and maybe trying to fit in too much. And I know that this is something that happens a lot with groups, especially if it's their first and maybe only time to visit the museum and they only have an hour, and our experience is only focusing on 3 or 4 works of art, and they want to see everything and maybe feel a little disappointed that they're not going to kind of get to see everything in the collection. So our last kind of question before we break is, how do you balance the expectations of your audiences, maybe this similar expectation or something a little bit different, with your practice and with your teaching philosophy?
Should I start? I could start.
Sure.
So I think I said it, open-mindedness is a really big key for me. But with knowing my audience, I also need to do a little bit of research. So if they signed up for French art lesson, I might want to find out a little bit about why they're coming to look at French art. So also comes from some experience working here. It's like, okay, well, if they're coming to see French art, most likely they're French language students, or maybe they're social studies students. So kind of being able to being flexible, but being able to understand the audience. So if I have questions, we are totally, open to calling our teacher and find out why they're coming. Why do you want to see Impressionism? Are you studying the time period? Are you art students? So this might not be conversation before they come, but it might be that quick conversation checking in with the teacher when they first arrive. So, okay, these are the things that I'm planning on doing with you today. Are you okay with it? Is this what you want? So, and also being able to sort of change things around a little bit, if he wants something different. So I think just really quick thinking, being flexible and being open-minded, and just doing a little bit of work. And I think here at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, all of us, the gallery teachers, we don't mind spending that time, finding out who we're about to teach or we're going to teach next week. Do a little bit of digging so that we could really deliver successful lesson.
I would absolutely agree. Oh, sorry, Amanda. I was just going to say, I agree. I think it's extremely important to know who's coming in, why, but then also I like to explain to them as well in that kind of initial conversation, why are you coming? What would you like to see? Here are the options, but also kind of start out with, we focus usually in our tours, they're an hour long, and we focus on 3 to 4 works of art and do these different activities. So also kind of telling them that to begin with so that they have that expectation when they come into the museum. Of course, there are certain times when they come in, we explain that we're also usually only going to one gallery. We do have some things, oh, well, I want to see this or I want to see that. And what we usually try and do with most of our tours is if they do come in for a specific hour-long tour, because they already have an admission sticker, we say, you're now free to explore the rest of the museum and whatever you'd like. But saying that, our time with you, it's important for us to really get a conversation going. And I think that goes back to our initial points on what are our teaching philosophies and explaining that, here at the Denver Art Museum, we really want you to connect with works of art, and this is how we facilitate that. But if you would like to have your own experience, here are these other places you can go. And I think a good way to also complement that is looking at, in-gallery educational installations, that we are lucky enough that we do have different educational spaces around the museum that can facilitate deeper understanding without having somebody physically there. So I think those are good matching to our, live programs that I think is a way to help kind of give people hopefully all of what they're looking for, both that in-person deep connection, and then, they're really being able to see a lot more of the collection on their own.
To piggyback on what you were saying, Danielle, it's definitely about flexibility. If they walk in and suddenly they say they really need to see a particular piece, that we're able to do that is a wonderful thing. And also to manage their expectations beforehand. So on the sign-in, when they register for the class, they know already that it's only going to be 3 pieces like you were saying, and that's just so much that we can do. And there's also what's good is if the group, because our galleries are relatively small, so we have to be aware of each other. And so if we notice that we're moving around, we have to re-coordinate, and that gets a bit tricky. But if it's just a few groups, then we can be very flexible and move from whatever piece to piece that they want. And also, if they really want to see a lot more, we say, well, we can end our tour earlier. And then you have time within the time that you've left school to go look around in the galleries if you need to. So it's very similar to what you're saying.
So very much what everyone has said, kind of back to what Young said about when groups are coming, if a French group is coming to view French art or whatever, getting to know their purpose is really important. We do that through our application process. So we have questions about what are your goals while you're here. And with those, we can follow up. If the teachers have a goal that seems to be a little bit outside the tour, sometimes we can tweak it and customize to work within their goals. Sometimes maybe we recommend a different tour. But something that I have found is really helpful is when they have a learning goal like that, to figure out for the teacher's perspective, is the tour introducing the topic in the classroom? Is it in the middle of the topic, or are they coming on the tour as kind of a wrapping up? Because that really matters in how you frame the school tour.
Definitely. Thanks, Sally. Also, one thing I would just add to this is that, so I support the team that does school tours, but I also facilitate a lot of other experiences, and those follow a very different model. So typically it's looking at just one work of art in the galleries and then going into our studio space and creating a work of art that's inspired by that work or inspired by the theme. And so in those cases, a lot of times they're multi-visit programs. So groups are either coming several times throughout the semester or the year, or they have the opportunity to return. So kind of establishing that at the beginning and letting people know that they can return. Another thing that we always try to do is we have our permanent collection space is always free, complimentary admission. Our temporary exhibition space typically has an admission fee, and so we'll typically give a coupon for whoever's participating in the program, for them and their entire family to return to the museum for free, and that helps to kind of alleviate some of these concerns. So we may never have a chance to visit, so we really try to stress, like, the museum admission is free and you'll get this coupon, so you can definitely return with your families and have this really rich experience, families or friends, outside of this experience that we've had. So we do not have any questions right now from Twitter. So if anyone has a question, please tweet that and we will respond. But until then, we'll just continue our discussion a little bit. Does anyone have anything to share? And if not, I have a
question.
Okay, great.
I wanted to ask our panelists, do you feel like what you do, gallery teaching, we're talking about our topic, is well supported by your institution, the rest of your institution? Do you sometimes feel like they don't really know what you're doing? Why are you in the gallery? We're trying to install this art. You know, why are these children here? Are you sometimes surprised by their reaction?
I think that that's a really interesting question, because I think especially it being at large museums, it is sometimes, there's a lot going on, so they might not know what this is. And I think, again, because a lot of times working with populations with special needs, I get that kind of question of, well, why are you doing this type of tour for adults with Alzheimer's if they can't remember it? And that's really like, oh, but it's not about that. It's about the experience that they're having at the museum. And I think it's a really interesting thing, because it's important to then spread that awareness, I think, around the museum, and to let people know why we're here, what we're doing. But I think that's a really good point. So that's interesting.
In our institution, education is a very, very high priority. So with things like the students and how we interact with the prep team or the coffee bar, like, we send our schedules out to different departments every week as we schedule, so that they know how many students are going to be in what grade levels, and then they largely work around us or accommodate us.
And I'll just kind of piggyback on that too. Our school tours happen before we're open to the public. So the museum opens the galleries at 11 a.m. and our school tours are happening at 9 or 10 a.m. Sometimes at 11. It depends on how far away the school is coming. So the students are really having a pretty quiet, there's less distractions in the galleries, except for our prep team, who's kind of, sometimes moving artwork, but that's also a really great experience for the students and something they don't typically get to see if they come back. It's kind of a behind the scenes look at the art museum. So yes, we are very supported in that way. And then a lot of our literacy programs as well meet before opening hours. And I think that's really important, because it is a more for students, and these are typically adult students who are English language learners, but an opportunity for them to have a really focused experience at the museum without that extra noise and the distractions around, so that they can really kind of look and think through kind of working in maybe several different languages as they're sharing their thoughts and ideas. So that is we do have a lot of support for our programs, and communication, as Sally mentioned, is definitely key. Sometimes there are challenges with that, but we try to communicate as much as possible on the front end.
Just to talk about the quietness of galleries, for a while we had Mondays open to our students, which was really a great experience because it was this idea of them taking ownership of the museum. And I don't know if you get that on your early mornings. But it's we don't do it now, but we have done it, and I'm hoping that will come back. And that was a real support of the program. That was great. But it really gave the kids, I think, those students, a sense of like, we're the only ones here, and this is our space, and it also gave them a few distractions, which I'm sure with Danielle that's important too. So.
All right, great. So we have a question, and maybe address it to the group. How do you use gallery teaching to respond to current events? So if anyone wants to start.
Well, I can say that our tours are how they're designed. Again, I'm thinking more school tours. It is more difficult to, I think, respond to that because as an encyclopedic museum, we have a lot of objects that might not necessarily comment on current events. But I think we do have a show that's up right now that is contemporary pieces that are talking about a lot of these kind of current topics. And I think it's our job as staff to really encourage our docents to feel comfortable talking about these topics. But I think it's really just, again, providing an open, safe space, going back to our original idea too, of saying, let's use this as a starting off point, but I think still anchoring it in the object that we're looking at, and then making that as a more safe space that we're talking about what we're seeing. And then usually that will then lead to more conversations about maybe current topics. And again, making sure that people are aware that it's a safe space and that we all can have these conversations without feeling like we'll be, kind of hurt in some way, offended, that it's just an open space.
I agree with that. And the way that our school tours are structured, we would address current events if they came up as part of the conversation, but we don't have tours that directly address that. So where I have more of that opportunity is with teacher professional development. Our Wednesday night series is usually based on difficult conversations. And so we will work with artworks and provide teachers different strategies for how to deal with issues in their classrooms. Like recently we did a session on stereotypes in the media and across media.
Yeah, and I will say that next year we're going to have an exhibition at the museum, a temporary exhibition called Border Cantos, Sight and Sound Explorations of the Mexican-American Border. And so this is definitely focusing on current events. It's a collaboration between a photographer and a sculpture artist, and it's focusing on the border. So we have been working with some teacher advisory groups or a team of teachers to kind of just talk through how we can support what they're doing in the classroom and what they feel would be like a really good experience for their students. So I think definitely involving teachers sometimes in those conversations is important, and also working with a team to figure out what might be the best way to teach these different experiences. Okay, so thank you all for sharing your hour with us. Thank you to our panel for sharing all of their thoughts and ideas. Thank you to everyone for listening, and we hope you have a wonderful day. It's 2 o'clock, so if there's any last comments, please share those from our.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It was great to meet all of you.
All right, wonderful. So thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.